You should see these disturbing historical photos. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most? Calvin Byrd built his sideshow act around goat horns fastened to a hidden metal strip on his head, making them look as if they grew from his skin. When newspapers revealed the trick in the early 1900s, the fake horns became more famous than the act itself. This photo shows officials removing one of the Wonderland case victims from a Los Angeles home in 1981. The unsolved case later drew attention because it connected Hollywood nightlife, a former actor, and a powerful club owner. In 1915, Adolf Hitler posed with 2 German soldiers and Fuchsel, the stray dog he had adopted near Fromelles during the First World War. The quiet photo feels strange because this small dog became one of the few personal attachments he remembered from the front. In 1946, hundreds of Boeing Flying Fortress and Consolidated Liberator planes sat in perfect rows at Kingman in Arizona. Many had crossed oceans during the war, but here they waited to be taken apart for metal and parts. These French soldiers wore experimental camouflage suits during the First World War, designed to break up the human shape in trenches and ruined ground. The strange hooded outfit looks almost theatrical, but it shows how armies were already learning that being unseen could matter as much as armor. At Eniwetok Atoll on June 29, 1958, the Oak test lit the morning sky with a flash measured at 8.9 megatons. The soft colors make the scene look almost unreal, but this was one of the largest United States nuclear tests ever filmed in the Pacific. This photo shows the House of Ministries in Tashkent around 1991, with giant portraits of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels still hanging on its glass front. The street looks ordinary, but the image was taken at the edge of a historic break, when Soviet Uzbekistan was about to become an independent country.
The Cardiff Giant was a 10-foot stone figure secretly buried in New York and then presented as an ancient giant in 1869. Crowds paid to see it, and the fake discovery became one of the most famous public tricks in American history. This wreckage came from Pan American Flight 103, which came down over Lockerbie, Scotland on December 21, 1988. The case became one of the most studied air disasters of the 20th century, and this broken nose section became one of its most haunting images. In 1973, John Paul Getty III was taken in Italy, and his billionaire grandfather, Jean-Paul Getty, first refused a demand for $17 million. He later paid $2.2 million because it fit a tax rule, then treated the remaining $800,000 as a loan to his own son. In Belfast on February 20th, 1978, a British serviceman spoke with a young boy outside a tower block in the New Lodge district. The quiet moment is striking because the building also held a permanent observation post, showing how daily life continued beside constant security presence. Frida Kahlo painted from bed after a traffic accident at age 18 left her with lifelong injuries and long periods of recovery. A mirror fixed above her bed let her study her own face, and that painful setup helped create the self-portraits that made her world famous. Josiah Benjamin Garrison was a West Virginia sideshow performer who became extremely thin as a teenager and was advertised at only 55 pounds. His show career lasted about 1 year, but this portrait makes him look calm, formal, and more dignified than the posters around him. After 2 aircraft struck USS Bunker Hill near Okinawa in May 1945, water poured down the carrier as the crew worked to keep it afloat. The ship survived, but the damage ended its frontline role and made this one of the most remembered carrier photos of the Pacific War. In Palm Springs in 1971, Victor Skrebneski photographed Dennis Hopper beside old Hollywood masters John Ford and John Huston. The quiet bed shot feels unusual because it places a rebellious new star between 2 directors who helped build the old studio era. In 1988, an Afghan man stood among the ruins of his village near the Pakistani border after Soviet aircraft hit his home. He looked toward the sky because his sons had been inside the house, turning the single frame into a quiet record of one family's loss. In Chile in 1973, soldiers and firefighters carried a covered detainee during the first weeks after the military takeover. The image is linked to the Caravan of Death, a helicopter mission in which at least 75 prisoners were taken from local jails and never came back. At Bikini Atoll, 23 United States nuclear tests between 1946 and 1958 reshaped islands and left the lagoon unsafe for generations. Decades later, scientists found coral growing back there, turning a damaged reef into a strange study of survival. On February 21st, 1973, Libyan Arab Airlines Flight 114 strayed over Israeli-controlled Sinai after a navigation mistake. Israeli fighters brought it down, leaving 5 survivors and making the case a rare Cold War moment, condemned by both Washington and Moscow. Jacob Israel Dahan was a Dutch Jewish poet, lawyer, and journalist who moved to Jerusalem and became a sharp critic of the Zionist leadership. In 1924, he was killed there by a Haganah member, making his case one of the earliest political killings in Mandate Palestine. This Wiriyamu Memorial in Mozambique marks December 16, 1972, when Portuguese forces entered the village during the colonial war. The rough stone sign is simple, but it preserves a place that became a symbol of hidden wartime suffering. Swiss diplomat Karl Lutz used protective letters and safe houses in Budapest to shield more than 62,000 Jews during the Second World War. His calm paperwork looked ordinary from the outside, but it became one of the largest rescue efforts of the Holocaust. Priscilla and Emmett Behano were famous sideshow performers who met while working in the same traveling show and stayed married for nearly 60 years. Their portrait feels powerful, because behind the unusual stage image was a long partnership built on love, steady work, and loyal family life. In February 1926, young Japanese naval officer Isoroku Yamamoto sat in Washington with United States Navy leaders during his time as naval attaché. The calm meeting feels eerie, because Yamamoto later became one of the central planners of Japan's Pearl Harbor operation. In 1965, Steve Shapiro photographed a woman reading Muhammad Speaks, the Nation of Islam newspaper, as its front page warned that worse days were ahead. The calm bedroom scene feels tense, because a private mourning moment carries the mood of civil rights America. Japanese ground crews refueled the Nakajima floatplane on a remote lagoon, using wing tanks to extend its reach far from normal airfields. Known to Allied pilots as the Roof, it was a seaplane version of the famous Zero, built for islands where no runway existed. In 1977, Soviet schoolchildren stood outside the USSR mission to the United Nations in North Riverdale, the Bronx, far from the country their parents represented. The photo feels unusual because Cold War life appears here as school bags, winter coats, and 2 children behind a New York fence. Ernest Hemingway is photographed at Finca Vigia, his Cuban home, holding the firearm kept in the house during his final years. The casual pose feels heavy because the same object was later linked to his death in 1961, after decades of novels, war reporting, travel, and illness. From 1903 to 1907, crews built the East River subway tunnel to link Manhattan and Brooklyn beneath the water. This photo shows men inside a huge steel ring, using heavy shields and hand labor while river pressure waited just outside the walls. In the 1860s, the British ship HMS Daphne carried East African children and adults rescued from an Indian Ocean slave vessel. The crowded deck shows how young many of the captives were, making this one of the most striking anti-slavery photographs of the era. The Champawat tigress became infamous across Nepal and northern India after officials linked her to 436 human deaths from 1898 to 1907. Jim Corbett finally tracked her in Kumaun, ending one of history's most feared tiger cases. Winston Churchill was photographed at age 7 in 1881, dressed in the sailor suit favored by upper-class Victorian families. The serious pose feels strange because this small boy would later lead Britain through the Second World War and become one of its most quoted leaders. In 1964, a girl uses an Avtomat Gazvoda soda machine in Riviera Park, Sochi, where shared glasses were common at public fountains. The neat row of machines shows a small, everyday luxury of Soviet summer life. Cheap, sparkling water served plain or with syrup. On July 3, 1988, Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian Airbus, was brought down over the Persian Gulf by missiles fired from USS Vincennes during a tense naval encounter. This scattered wreckage became a lasting symbol of the tragedy. After all, 290 people on board were lost. Catherine Bowes-Lyon was a first cousin of Queen Elizabeth II, quietly placed in a Surrey care institution in 1941. For decades, public records listed her as no longer living, until journalists found her alive in 1987. In 1962, Jane Mansfield and Clint Eastwood shared a flight back to the United States while traveling for a California film event. The airplane doorway photo feels rare because it catches two very different Hollywood careers crossing for a brief, quiet moment. On July 25, 1946, the Baker test went off underwater in Bikini Atoll's lagoon, lifting a huge column of water around target ships. This rare aerial view shows why Operation Crossroads changed naval planning, as the hidden danger came from the sea itself. In 1898, Goldie Williams was photographed in Omaha after being held for vagrancy, and she refused to uncross her arms for the camera. Her fixed stare and defiant pose turned a routine police portrait into one of the most unforgettable mugshots of the era. In January 1878, former President Ulysses Grant visited the pyramids of Giza and met William Loring, a former Confederate general then serving Egypt. The strange scene placed Civil War rivals beside ancient stone, far from the country that had divided them only 13 years earlier. In 2012, chaos broke out at Port Said Stadium in Egypt after a match involving Al Ahly, leaving 74 supporters dead. The red flares and empty seats in this photo capture the night when a football crowd became the center of a national tragedy. In February 1976, men dressed as Revolutionary War soldiers stepped out of a New York City taxi on their way to a Bicentennial exhibit. The scene is funny because the old uniforms, long rifles, and modern cab turn American history into a sudden street encounter. In 1998, Sarah Knaus, then 118, watched John Glenn return to space on television from her room in Allentown. Reporters expected wonder, but she quietly called space travel useless, making her reaction as memorable as the launch. On July 4, 1976, the Italian training ship Amerigo Vespucci sailed into New York Harbor during Operation Sail for the United States Bicentennial. More than 200 tall ships joined the parade, turning a city in financial crisis into a global harbor celebration. Around the 1920s, a young Persian woman from an elite family was photographed reading in a private room, surrounded by carved wood and patterned walls. The relaxed pose feels modern because it shows upper-class Iranian life before later revolutions changed how such images were seen. On July 3, 1944, United States Marines moved through burning buildings in Garapan as the battle for Saipan reached the island's main town. The photo shows Pacific fighting at street level, where every ruined house and narrow path became part of the push toward Japan's inner defense line. Maciej Rataj was a Polish writer and parliament leader who twice served as acting president during the fragile years after Poland regained independence. In 1940, German forces took him to Palmyra, where his death made him one of the best-known Polish civilian leaders lost in the occupation.
In April 1945, Hungarian musician Bonda Gaza showed United States soldiers how he escaped from the Gardlegen barn tragedy in Germany. Sitting in the grass, he turned survival into evidence, pointing to the small opening that let him crawl out while more than 1,000 forced laborers were trapped inside. In November 1990, Muhammad Ali traveled to Baghdad and met Saddam Hussein while trying to secure the release of 15 Americans held in Iraq. The grainy frame feels surreal because one of the world's most famous athletes stepped into a tense diplomatic crisis without any official title. After Hurricane Katrina hit in late August 2005, floodwater covered whole neighborhoods in New Orleans and along the Gulf Coast. Nearly 1,400 people lost their lives, and the damage was later estimated near $125 billion. On July 2, 1944, a United States Navy PB-4Y-1 from Bombing Squadron 115 caught a Japanese Kawanishi H-8K Emily over the Central Pacific. The smoke trail behind the huge flying boat shows how air patrols turned empty ocean into a battlefield. Before 1939, the Malinowski family posed outside their beer house in Baranovice, then part of Poland and now in Belarus. The simple storefront photo freezes a borderland world of small shops and family businesses just before the Second World War changed it. In 1985, a young Afghan resistance fighter worked at a repair station inside an underground hideout in Khost province. The machines and stacked rifles show how fighters kept old equipment working far from normal supply lines during the Soviet-Afghan War. Sylvester Greenwald was a United States Navy medic from Illinois who served with the 6th Marine Regiment during the Battle for Saipan in 1944. He lost his life at age 23 while helping wounded Marines, and is buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. On April 25, 1974, HMCS Huron lay off Portugal as the Carnation Revolution unfolded on shore and soldiers filled the streets. The destroyer in the background and armored vehicle in front capture the strange calm of a coup that ended decades of dictatorship with little fighting. In July 1991, retired Admiral Arleigh Burke stood with his wife at the commissioning of USS Arleigh Burke, the first destroyer to carry his name. The quiet dockside photo marks the start of a ship class that became the backbone of the United States Navy surface fleet. In 1913, sailors on the British battlecruiser New Zealand posed with Polaris Jack, their bulldog mascot, peering through a ship fitting like a framed portrait. The serious little face made him look almost like another crewman aboard one of the most famous visiting warships of the era. In 1971, young Chinese children gathered with the Little Red Book during the Cultural Revolution, repeating loyalty rituals around Mao Zedong. The photo feels unsettling because political devotion was taught so early, turning a children's gathering into a lesson in ideology. After the Second World War, John Steinbeck and Robert Capa visited Kyiv while documenting Soviet life for their project, A Russian Journal. This mirror photo feels rare because two famous witnesses of war became the subjects inside a city still marked by occupation and rebuilding. In 1992, former United States President Richard Nixon was photographed buying melons at a Moscow market during Russia's first post-Soviet year. The casual scene feels strange because a Cold War president stood like an ordinary shopper in the city he once treated as America's main rival. On July 1, 1946, the Able test exploded above Bikini Atoll during Operation Crossroads, the first major post-war United States atomic test series. Seen from shore, the rising cloud marked a new era as the bomb was used to study what it could do to a fleet of warships. In August 1970, 21-year-old Olivia Newton-John walked through the National Jazz and Blues Festival in East Sussex just before her global pop fame. The relaxed photo catches her at the edge of stardom, surrounded by blankets, long hair, and open-air youth culture. Before The Wizard of Oz was filmed, a European troupe of performers with dwarfism found work in America, helping several avoid the danger rising in Europe. This group portrait feels cheerful, but behind it is a hidden escape story tied to one of Hollywood's most famous films. Before he became Tito, Josip Broz served as a young Austro-Hungarian sergeant major in the First World War, fighting in muddy frontline trenches. This image is striking because the future ruler of Yugoslavia appears here as an imperial soldier, long before his name became a symbol of partisans and power. In the early 1900s, members of a German Mensur student fencing club posed in padded gear and face guards before a formal match. The strange outfits were practical because these contests valued discipline, courage, and visible marks of status more than ordinary sport. In 1949, kindergarten children were asked to draw their fathers, and this girl proudly held up her blunt little portrait beside the real man. The photo is funny because the formal adult pose meets a child's fearless version with huge eyes, tiny details, and no attempt to flatter him. In 1899, Angelo George Kobel was photographed in Sweden after being detained for vagrancy, then released with only a warning. The record card beside him turns a minor street case into a rare portrait of a black Swedish man in formal dress at the end of the 19th century. In 1948, 6-year-old Richard Baranski sat with his crown after winning a cranberry pie eating contest in just 15 seconds. His messy face and calm pose make the photo unforgettable, as if he had just conquered a mountain made of dessert. On April 25, 1945, Italian women partisans walked through Milan as the city broke free from occupation and fascist rule. Their coats and calm faces make the scene powerful because liberation here looks like ordinary women carrying the weight of a changed country. In 1944 or 1945, a paratrooper from Italy's Folgore Regiment practiced in the snow, wearing the armband of the Azzurro Battalion. The close pose feels intense because it turns a late war soldier into one frozen moment of focus, cold, and discipline. Andrew Carnegie, one of America's richest industrialists, offered $20 million after the Spanish-American War to help the Philippines gain independence from the United States. The offer failed, but the country finally became independent on July 4, 1946. This is one of the last known photos of a living thylacine, often called the Tasmanian tiger, taken before the species disappeared in 1936. Its striped back and dog-like face make the image feel alive, but it became a symbol of how fast a unique animal can vanish. In March 1973, American prisoners of war stood for roll call at Na Tu So Prison in Hanoi, North Vietnam, during the final phase of their captivity. The color photo feels stark because the men appear in simple prison clothing just as the long Vietnam War was nearing its end. In 1923, French journalist Pierre Labrique rode a bicycle down the Eiffel Tower's 1,792 steps from the top floor. The stunt turned Paris's most famous landmark into a vertical racetrack and made his name stick to one of its boldest legends. Ronnie and Reggie Cray were identical twins who became two of London's best-known underworld figures in the 1960s. Mixing with celebrities while controlling parts of the city's nightlife. This quiet tea table photo feels strange because it shows polished manners beside a dark reputation. In Miami Beach in 1955, Sammy Davis Jr. walked with model Maria Stinger while helping photographer Bunny Yeager on a seaside shoot. The easy beach scene is rare because the famous entertainer was not the star here, but the eager assistant learning photography. In Los Angeles in 1969, Peter Falk, Ben Gazzara, David Rowlands, and John Cassavetes relaxed between scenes for husbands, photographed by Sam Shaw. The loose pose fits the film itself, a raw portrait of male friendship, grief, and drifting middle age, far from studio polish. In the 1950s, students at St. Mary's Berea crouched under desks during a school air raid drill, part of the familiar duck and cover routine. The photo is unsettling because childhood here means books on desks, empty chairs, and children practicing for a danger they could barely understand. In the 1950s, Tiny Nailers Drive-In in Los Angeles served meals straight to parked cars, with car hops often taking orders on roller skates at the window. The photo captures American car culture at its peak, when a night out could mean burgers, chrome, neon, and a private booth on wheels. In the 1950s, teenagers crowded the soda fountain at the Harlem Young Women's Christian Association in New York, turning milkshakes and ice cream sodas into a social ritual. The counter worked like a pre-internet meeting place where friends, flirting, music, and news all passed through one bright room. In 1954, the famous white dress scene from The 7-Year Itch was filmed above a subway grate in Manhattan, drawing a huge late-night crowd. The staged gust lasted only moments, but it became one of the most repeated images in Hollywood history. In the 1950s, families gathered around one television set as the small screen began replacing the fireplace and movie theater as the center of home life. This living room photo captures the moment entertainment became a shared nightly ritual, with every chair turned toward the glowing box. In 1952, Operation Ivy Mike tested the first full-scale hydrogen device at Eniwetok Atoll, creating a cloud so large it rose far above the Pacific horizon. The glowing sky in this photo marked a new Cold War age, when weapons science suddenly reached a much more frightening scale. On July 17, 1955, crowds gathered at Disneyland in Anaheim for its televised opening day, one day before the park welcomed the wider public. The station, flags, and packed square look simple, but this photo shows the start of a new kind of entertainment empire. In the 1950s, salon hood dryers made futuristic white helmets look like normal beauty equipment, helping women set the sculpted curls of the decade. The waiting row feels almost like a science lab, but it was just an ordinary hair appointment with magazines and warm air. In 1952, Christine Jorgensen became one of the first Americans whose gender transition was covered by newspapers across the country. This front page turned a private medical story into a national media event, long before most people knew how to discuss it with respect. After the Second World War, tiny microcars like this became popular in Europe because fuel was expensive and city streets were crowded. This three-wheeled bubble car looked like a toy beside normal sedans, but it offered cheap private travel when many families still could not afford a full car. In 1960, the first televised presidential debate put John Kennedy and Richard Nixon under studio lights, with cameras watching every pause and expression. This behind-the-scenes view shows how television changed politics, making image and composure almost as important as argument. In Miami during the Cold War, a newlywed couple spent their honeymoon inside a 20-ton concrete and steel shelter to prove a family could live there for 2 weeks. The smiling table scene feels surreal because romance was staged inside a room built for atomic fallout. In the early 1950s, movie audiences wore cardboard glasses as Hollywood pushed three-dimensional films to compete with the new power of television. This packed theater shows the craze at full force when studios sold depth as a thrill you could almost reach from your seat. In the 1950s, Northland Center near Detroit showed the future of shopping with one huge complex surrounded by seas of parked cars. The aerial view looks ordinary today, but it helped define the modern mall age, where suburbs, driving, and retail all met in one place. In June 1964, Nelson Mandela raised his clenched hands from a prison van after the Rivonia trial sentenced him to life in prison. The blurred photo became a symbol of defiance, showing a leader entering decades of captivity without lowering his message. Shigeki Tanaka was 19 when he won the 1951 Boston Marathon, only 6 years after surviving Hiroshima as a child. As he crossed the finish line, the crowd reportedly stayed quiet, making his victory feel less like sport and more like history walking past. In 1918, New Zealand soldiers near Grevillers posed with a captured German Mauser T-Gewehr, one of the first rifles built to stop tanks. Its huge barrel and awkward size show how quickly the First World War forced armies to invent strange new tools for a new battlefield. Before the polio vaccine, children with serious breathing trouble lay inside iron lungs like these, with only their heads outside the metal chambers. In the 1930s, these machines used pressure to move air in and out of the body, turning a hospital ward into a row of survival boxes. In 1933, a glamorous film actress stepped into the boxing ring to pose beside a towering heavyweight champion. The photo works because the contrast is perfect, with studio elegance, ring grit, and two very different kinds of fame meeting under the same lights. In about 1917, workers filled the torpedo shop at the Washington Navy Yard, assembling naval equipment in a hall packed with steel parts and moving machinery. The blurred figures make the room feel alive, showing how industrial speed powered the First World War at home. In Paris in 1909, crowds walked under balloons and early aircraft at a grand exhibition devoted to the new dream of flight. The hall looks like science fiction for its time, with airships, fragile planes, and curious visitors standing at the start of the aviation age. This photo shows ENIAC, one of the first general-purpose electronic computers, filling a room with cables, panels, and vacuum tubes in the 1940s. What looks like a wall of machinery helped prove that calculations once done by hand could move into the electronic age. In the late 1910s, the Bergonic chair was used on First World War patients with war trauma, sending electric currents through the body during treatment. The calm clinic setting looks modern, but the machine shows how little doctors then understood about the mind after battle. Rocky Marciano retired at 32 as the only heavyweight champion to leave boxing unbeaten, with a 49-0 record. This family photo shows the quieter reason behind that choice, as he said home responsibilities mattered more than staying in the ring. On June 25, 1948, Utah held a joint funeral for the 4 Borgstrom brothers, who all lost their lives while serving in the Second World War. The flag-covered caskets show one family's loss on a scale so rare that the Army later removed their remaining son from combat duty. On June 24, 1945, 2 Japanese officers attended the Red Square Victory Parade in Moscow, while Japan was still formally neutral toward the Soviet Union. The scene was awkward because the parade celebrated the fall of Germany, Japan's main ally in the war. In May 1945, Soviet soldiers examined the guillotine inside Berlin Plötzensee prison, a site used by the Nazi justice system for political prisoners. Ivan Shagin's photo feels chilling because the war had ended, but the machinery of state repression still stood in the room. In 1979, Pol Pot led Khmer Rouge fighters through the Cambodian jungle after Vietnamese forces pushed his movement from power in Phnom Penh. The long column looks like a retreat, but it also shows how a fallen regime kept operating from the borderlands instead of disappearing. In 1940, German soldiers rolled through Oslo on trucks packed with gear during Operation Vesrubung, the invasion of Norway. The tram and watching civilians make the scene feel ordinary and tense at once, as daily city life met the start of occupation. In 1971, Fidel Castro stood beside Augusto Pinochet in Chile when Pinochet was still a senior officer under President Salvador Allende. The photo feels surreal because 2 years later, Pinochet would overthrow Allende, while Castro became one of his fiercest foreign enemies. In May 1940, the troop ship Queen Mary entered Sydney Harbor with tug assistance after sailing from New York for wartime conversion in Australia. Soon after, she carried Australian soldiers toward Europe, turning a luxury liner into one of the war's fastest-moving barracks. This aerial view shows the sharp border between the Salt River Indian Reservation and suburban Scottsdale, Arizona, where desert and planned streets meet like 2 maps stitched together. The grid on the city side traces back to early American land surveys that shaped how western towns expanded. In 1944, Long Beach, California, was crowded with oil derricks, turning a coastal city into a forest of steel towers. Andreas Feininger's photo shows how deeply the oil boom reshaped the landscape before neighborhoods and beaches reclaimed the view. In France in 1944, Arthur Muth, Carmine Sileo, and Kelly LaSalle of the United States 79th Infantry Division posed after 127 straight days on the line. Their worn faces tell the story of Normandy, Cherbourg, and the forests without needing a single extra word. In 1931, the cargo steamer Bechimo was abandoned in Arctic ice near Alaska after its crew could no longer keep it moving. Instead of sinking, the empty ship drifted for decades, appearing along the coast until its last confirmed sighting in 1969. In this early photo, Ernest Hemingway sits by a brick fireplace long before he became the Pulitzer and Nobel-winning author of The Old Man and the Sea. In 1961, his life ended in Idaho, leaving behind a public legend and a private story shaped by fame, injury, and illness. In 1916, an Italian sentry stood at the mouth of a tunnel on Mount Sengio, where mountain warfare turned cliffs and caves into front lines. The bright opening behind him makes the photo feel lonely, as if one soldier is guarding the edge between stone, snow, and war. At Piardoba Airfield in India in 1944, Boeing B-29 Superfortresses prepared for some of the longest-range United States air missions of the Pacific Campaign. The photo shows the hidden scale of the effort, with heat, dust, engines, and distance all working against the crews. On August 3, 2005, a United States Marine vehicle was hit on a road in Iraq, leaving smoke and fire across the desert highway. 14 Marines lost their lives and 1 survived, making this blurred field photo a hard record of one convoy's sudden and devastating moment. In 1939, a Japanese soldier inspected captured Soviet SHKAS aircraft guns, likely removed from a downed Tupolev bomber during border fighting. The photo shows a quiet intelligence moment where studying enemy equipment mattered almost as much as the battle itself. In summer 1916, Italian infantrymen on Podgora Hill near Gorica worked in trenches wearing early protective masks after gas reached the Isonzo front. The awkward goggles and gauze masks show how modern war forced soldiers to fight in a world they could barely breathe through. During the Second World War, Soviet cavalry troops from General Isa Pliev's 4th Guards Kuban Cossack Corps escorted German and Romanian prisoners on the Eastern Front. The raised hands, horses, and dusty road show an old-style cavalry force moving through a very modern war. In 1939, this overhead New York street scene looks almost patterned because nearly every man below wears a brimmed hat. The crowd shows how strongly hats once shaped daily public dress before casual clothing and changing habits slowly made bare heads normal in American cities. In the 1910s, an Italian immigrant family arrived in the United States carrying their belongings and children through the port inspection system. The tense faces and packed bundle show how migration often began with exhaustion, hope, and a single chance at a new life. In 1862, during the Civil War, people enslaved on James Hopkinson's plantation in South Carolina were photographed planting sweet potatoes under watchful eyes. The quiet field scene is powerful because it shows forced labor as daily routine, with families and tools frozen in one ordinary workday. In Los Angeles in the 1920s, a young man posed between 2 women while showing off enormous white Oxford bags, the ultra-wide trousers that became a student fashion craze. The outfit looks comic today, but it was once a bold sign of youth style against older dress rules. In this Soviet naval portrait, a captain lieutenant stands beside a quadruple Vickers anti-aircraft mount fitted with 12.7mm guns. The bearded officer and clustered barrels give the photo a stern shipboard feel, where watch duty meant scanning the sky as much as the sea. In Vienna in 1931, Sigmund Freud stood beside sculptor Oscar Niemann while his own bust was being shaped in clay, his face almost matching the unfinished head. The photo feels strangely intimate because the man who studied hidden thoughts is watching himself become an object of memory while still alive. In Little Rock, Arkansas, in 1961, protesters gathered outside the state capitol with signs opposing racial integration and calling it communism. The photo shows how Cold War fear was used to defend segregation, only years after the school crisis made the city famous. During the Second World War, an orphaned boy adopted by a Soviet air regiment wrote, "For mother, for father," on bomb casings before a mission. The image is hard to forget because childhood, grief, and wartime propaganda meet in one small hand, writing on steel. This vehicle is linked to the Nazi Einsatzgruppen, mobile units that followed the German army into occupied Eastern Europe during the Second World War. The image is chilling because it shows how persecution was turned into paperwork, transport, and routine machinery far from the front. On June 28, 1969, patrons of the Stonewall Inn in New York resisted a police raid, turning one night at a bar into a national turning point. The uprising helped launch the modern LGBTQ rights movement and made the small Greenwich Village site historic. In central Italy, civilians and rail workers inspect a damaged railway after an Allied air raid cut through a rural line during the Second World War. The misty countryside looks almost calm, but the broken rails show how attacks on supply routes pulled ordinary villagers into the war. In the 1960s, Egyptian-backed Republican forces marched through Yemen during a civil war that drew in regional powers and reshaped the Arabian Peninsula. The dusty column shows a local conflict becoming part of a larger Cold War struggle over monarchy, republic, and influence. On May 20th, 1918, American soldiers used a Hotchkiss gun near Villers-Tournelle, firing across no man's land from a cramped position. The photo shows how First World War combat often came down to mud, canvas cover, narrow sight lines, and minutes of intense focus. On November 3, 1944, the United States cruiser Reno was struck by Japanese submarine Bernard 41 while operating near the Philippines. This aerial view from the next day shows salvage crews working to keep the damaged light cruiser afloat long enough to reach repair. In 1892, photographer John Johnston captured a woman diving from a pier, her dress blurring in midair above the water. The motion feels modern and daring, showing one summer leap frozen by early stereoscopic photography more than 130 years ago. On February 15, 1961, young Yugoslavs marched in Maribor after the death of Congolese leader Patrice Lumumba. The banner calling for a free Africa shows how his fate echoed far beyond Congo, reaching students and workers in socialist Yugoslavia. That's all for today. If you liked it, please support the video with a like and a subscription. Thanks for watching. See you very soon.